Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first YouTube-only edition of F Major Added Second Chord. I am your same old host, Miles White. Recently, I mean yesterday, from the perspective of today, the 6th of May, and Feliz Cinco de Mayo, incidentally, just belatedly, and Happy May Day, belatedly as well, and Happy Free Comic Book Day. Yesterday was Free Comic Book Day, and I went to my local comic book shop and got some free comic books. And also I bought some stuff because, you gotta support the business. You gotta show your support so that, these things keep happening. My first Free Comic Book Day comic was an Uncle Scrooge, actually. I remember it. And it involved the Beagle Boys were building a building next to Scrooge's so that they could steal all of his money. So he took his money out to a lake and he built a dam. But the Beagle Boys went to there too. So they were hijinks. Perhaps the most memorable part is that Scrooge had this habit of swimming in his money. He would leap through it like a porpoise. Oh, that was good stuff. That was pretty funny. I was telling my dad, it's Free Comic Book Day. You're coming up, I told him that. And he said, you still like comics? Of course I still like comics. Comics are as good as any other kind of book, really. In some respects, they're better. In some respects, they're worse. They go faster, which may or may not be they may or not be a advantage. But I think that on balance, they're pretty good. But I'm biased. I've been reading comic books for years. I've been reading them since I was a child. I remember reading, we would go to restaurants, and my parents would ensure that my brother and I behaved by bringing us reading materials at these restaurants. And I would read comic books, and I would read them at home, and we would go to the comic book store, and I would buy comics, and we would go on trips, and, on car trips, and I would read comic books on car trips, and I would just read comic books. Sometimes there would be graphic novels in the libraries of my education, and I would check those out, and I would read those when I could. And it was good. It was good. I don't consider myself, one of those success stories that you read about every so often. Time magazine or the art section of the New York Times or Newsweek or somebody publishes an article about how comics are a revitalized medium and, you should make your kids read comics and promote literacy. And that's a noble fight. As someone who enjoys comic books, I'm not going to fight against that. Certainly not every comic book is that good. Certainly not every comic book is something I want children to read. But no, I don't, because I was reading quote-unquote literature at the same time. That old stuffy old, just regular words on regular paper, Garamond or whatever. Helvetica? I don't know what people are using to typeset these days. But that's not the important part. The important part is the comic books. I remember my favorite superhero, because I was a superhero comic book guy, and I was always a Marvel guy. I still have a bunch of comic books, but only a handful are DC comics. And I was always an Iron Man guy. My first issue of Iron Man was number 208. I think it was the 80s. I could have told you the year at one point, but I know it was the 80s. And Tony Stark, he was wearing his silver armor, and he had to stop the missiles from reaching the United States. It was during the Cold War, sometime after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it was a similar plot line. These missiles in this Caribbean island. Except instead of communists, it was, a comic book supervillain mega terrorist organization, Advanced Idea Mechanics, if I remember correctly. The ones with the yellow costumes. I remember that comic book. I think I still have it. I haven't picked up, I went to Free Comic Book Day, but I haven't been following the Marvel storylines since about the time of Siege and Dark Reign, which for those of you who read comic books would know, that's like 5 years ago? That's a while. And now, of course, things are different. We've had a bunch of movies and stuff, and Captain America's a Nazi or something. Which means something has gone terribly awry, and I'm not in any rush to get back on that particular bandwagon. No, wait, I bought books in between. I bought the Fraction run of Hawkeye. Highly recommended. Matt Fraction's run on Hawkeye with David Aja, I think. Yeah, that's a good run. That's a good set of comics. Real gritty, but there's a lot of heart in there. I got into writing through comics. Did you know that? Because I was reading a lot, and the first stories I wrote for myself, because you had to write stories in the first grade and the second grade about whatever. The first stories I wrote for myself were in comic book form, and they were very bad comic books. They would just be these weird sloppy drawings that vaguely resembled the human anatomy, and these energy beams, and it was nonsense. None of it was good. I remember I used to say, when I grow up, I'm going to write comic books. I'm going to be a comic book writer. Or maybe it was a comic book art. It went back and forth whether I would draw the things or write them. I want to say that I spent more time thinking I would write, because I was never a good artist, really. I didn't know how to draw a woman, for instance, because women have curves, and I couldn't really grasp the idea of drawing curves, so I would just draw guys instead, because guys, they're parallel lines. It made my life much easier. Not great for the balance of the cast of my comics, but whatever. And also, I didn't draw backgrounds either. I would just draw these people just shooting energy beams at each other on, in front of this blank space. This sort of nothing. Which, if you're into that sort of thing, but I like to imagine that my comic books all happened in actual places. It would have taken more diligence than I had, really. But writing, coming up with ideas. Granted, I wasn't very good at writing either. I would just have a setup, and that would be like a page or two, and then I would write out this 15-page, and I say write out, but I mean improvise. I would write it and draw at the same time. This 15-page fight sequence. And I say 15 pages, but I wouldn't actually finish it most of the time. I think in my entire time I finished like 3 books. Yep. And I finished, I would, draw them in pencil in my, the sketchbooks I would buy from Michael's or whatever. I don't mean, I would edit them and then ink them and then color them and then have them like lettered. No. It was a manner of killing time. And it was effective, and I enjoyed it. Comics are still one of my favorite modes of storytelling. Even if I can't, write them or whatever. Because as a sequential storytelling medium, they have distinct advantages. Because they're more portable than a movie is. But they're more colorful than a book. They're not, you have to imagine your own sound effects and your own voices and your own background music. But there's a layer of style there that's harder to convey over prose. It's easier to do, there are movements and actions that are more adaptable to that medium than to just, straight prose. Because reading, action books, I always get lost. I always get a little confused about what's where. I don't usually have that issue with comic books. So of course I still like them. Obviously I'm biased because they were so much of my childhood. But, yeah. There's no reason not to go out to Free Comic Book Day and buy comics. Or get them free, and then go back later and buy more. Life is too long to be bored. Life is too long to deny yourself good things. Simple pleasures. Good times. Good times. Anyway, thank you for following me from the one platform to the other. And I'll be back next week. I'll see you then.